everybody. It's Carter, and welcome to this episode of Making It Up, the conversation series where I sit down and have lovely chats with fellow writers. Before we get started, I want to remind you that I am launching a new initiative called Unbound Writer, that in addition to me writing books, I'm also going to be offering one-on-one coaching. I'm going to be offering retreats, in-person retreats, and online courses. So if you wanted to find out more, just head over to my website, carterwilson.com. You're going to see a link there called For Writers, and you're going to see all the information on that stuff. We are launching a new website very shortly, but wanted to let you know that you can get in on the action. You can write to me. We can set up a consultation call if you're interested in coaching or have questions about the retreats, all that good stuff. So check it out, Unbound Writer. So on with the show today. So today I had a great guest on, and we had so much to talk about. Today I had Sara DiVello on. Now, Sara, in addition to being an accomplished writer, both a memoir and a mystery, is also a podcaster where she also talks to writers. So I had her on the show, and I'm going to be on her show in a few months, but she's interviewed over 300 writers on her Mystery and Thriller Mavens live events. So pretty fascinating stuff. So we've got to compare a lot of notes about the podcasting space and about good guests, bad guests, things we've learned, all that good stuff. But she's obviously more than just a podcaster. She, like I said, she's an accomplished author. Her most recent book is called Broadway Butterfly. That just came out in August of 2023. And it's gotten lots of buzz, lots of feedback, tremendous amount of readership, lots of reviews. So she's, and as she expressed on the show itself, you know, her first book was a memoir. Then she spent 9 years writing her mystery, but feels pretty well rooted and set in the mystery, thriller, suspense kind of area. So we had a lot of notes to compare on that as well. So it's a fantastic conversation. Very casual. I think we both have kind of similar approaches to chatting with people on podcasts. Very revelatory, very open and honest. Exactly the kind of conversation that I enjoy. So you're going to like this one, folks. This is my conversation with Sara DiVello.
Hi, Carter.
How are you?
I'm well. How are you?
I am doing just fine. Happy holidays and all that good stuff.
Happy holidays to you.
I feel like you're going to be judging me about my podcast, like during this. Like, I wouldn't have done it that way.
That's totally me. I'm super judgy. That is exactly what I will be thinking. In fact, I will be taking notes right here and sending you post-podcast feedback.
Right. Or you might cancel our later podcast because you're like, oh, that was kind of shit.
No, because then I'll be in the driver's seat and controlling everything.
That's true. You can grill me. Yeah. I mean, I think you started your podcast before me. I didn't start till 2021.
Okay.
But similarly, I think kind of this whole pandemic idea, and also I think it had been kind of spinning around a little bit in my head for some time, just in the sense that I love listening to interview podcasts, regardless of whether they're writers or whomever. And I really like kind of the Mark Maron style where it's just like, let's dig into your life. And so that's kind of what I do rather than kind of focusing on any specific book. I'm just like, tell me about all your fears.
Oh, perfect. I just realized my computer is plugged into my computer, but not to the outlet. So let me just plug this in.
Yeah.
Okay, so the therapy podcast approach.
Well, there's a couple of thoughts behind it, right? There's I just kind of like the idea of like, hey, I just met you at a cocktail party and I pull you aside and I just want to know everything about you. And I like kind of the spontaneity of that. So I don't honestly prepare a whole lot. I mean, I'm obviously familiar with whom I'm talking, but I don't have any questions scripted. And then also like with writers, interviewing writers is tough because you get all these books in the mail. I'm like, I can't, I can't read all these books. Thank you for the books, but I don't know if I can read them all. So I don't want to get myself in the corner where we're like going deep on, the ending of a book.
Yeah.
What is your approach? What was your kind of thought process behind starting the podcast?
So I started mine in the spring of 2020, and when we were all huddled in a self-comforting ball trying to figure out what to do. And prior to that, I used to spend a lot of time on the road. So I had a corporate career where I did PR and marketing. And so I took those skills and was teaching them to writers at conferences. And I'm also a yoga teacher. So I was on the road a lot teaching at yoga conferences. And so like the rest of us, all of those events were canceled. So I found myself on with a lot of time on my hands. And I thought, well, we're all, home for the next few weeks. Let's all have a big laugh at that.
Right.
While I'm stuck at home, I'll, pitch in, because originally I had hoped that my book would come out in March of 2020. And so I was thinking, oh my,
terrible timing.
Right. And thank God it didn't. But all of the people who did, I felt such compassion and empathy and, oh my God, I've got to help them, because what if it had, this is terrible. This is really hard.
Right.
And so I launched my series to try to pitch in and help them. And then it all just grew from there. And I found I really loved nerding out about craft and writing and, what makes something work and what doesn't. And I loved thinking about that and talking about that. And I've always believed that a rising tide lifts all boats. So I've always wanted to pitch in. Yeah. So it all just came together and grew from there.
And it's I'm sure together we kind of, you figure it out as you go along a little bit, but you do realize after time, like, it's really easy to screw up a podcast. It's really easy to have a horrible podcast. And we know that there are a lot. And I'm not saying ours are the best podcast in the world, but I do feel like it's so dependent.
Say that.
It's just so dependent on the personality. Like and I think this was a bit of a reaction I had too for wanting to start it, is like, I didn't like doing interviews where it was like, where do you get your ideas? If you could go to dinner with who gives a shit? And it's just so rote, and they have the questions listed and they're kind of flat and lacking person. I'm like, no, let's just talk. Let's just, and so, and sometimes it's easier than others. Sometimes, a lot of authors are, regardless of their status, they might be real introverted. Like, I'm doing this because I have to. And which really gets challenging when you get to the making it up part of my show, where it's like, fuck, I got to do this.
Yeah, exactly. And that's so true. And I think it's a 2-part energy exchange. And I think a lot of it is on, the host end of the mic, where I think it's really important. Like, I think because I've been doing events for 12 years. And so I've noticed both, in-person events and then also virtual events, what makes an interview fantastic? Why do I feel enriched and illuminated? Why do I feel this was freaking brilliant? And then some others I'm like, why didn't? And so I started thinking, like, why does this one work and why didn't this one work?
Right.
And I think part of it is I think a large part of it is that on the host end of the mic, a lot of people are not willing to leave their list of questions. And I think it's about preparedness, but also a courage and a flexibility in being willing to go with the flow. Because if you don't follow the organic flow of the conversation and you hit that rich, meaty part, and then you're like, anyway, back to the list, it's like, well, you just missed a big opportunity.
Yeah, totally. It's having that insight to know, like, there's something worth digging around in there. And maybe they don't want to talk about it. But that's why this isn't live. We can always cut this out or whatever. And I've had people reveal some really dark things to me. I'm like, but I like that in real life conversation. Like, again, if you're at a cocktail party, the last thing I want to do is hear small talk. So I'd rather like pull somebody aside, be like, just what's going on?
Same. Yeah, I have no tolerance and no talent for surface talk. In fact, I really feel anxiety about it. It's like, I want to go deep or go home.
Right. And we won't go on too long about the podcast, but it's just rare that I get a I talked to another writer who also hosts a podcast, so it's kind of
Yeah.
fun to kind of compare notes. But what's kind of interesting to me as well is just like it's a decent amount of work, but to me it's a lot of money because I do outsource the producing. I have a VA helping me with stuff, and I'm like, is it worth it? But then I realized, like, I have met so many people. The networking alone of it is worth my price of admission to doing the podcast, because it just builds this community that all writers need a community, whether they think so or not. They absolutely do, like in any other profession. And the podcast is a vehicle to, like, so many people now.
Yeah, exactly. And it is an investment. I don't outsource the producing or anything. I do. So mine is more sweat equity, but I have invested thousands of dollars into website, graphic design, a logo, all of that stuff. And web hosting, domain, like it adds up, and it's in the thousands for sure.
Yeah, totally. And I appreciate the fact that you have a dedicated website to your show. I do not. Mine sits on my website.
And I think that's fine. I mean, I link mine, but I had to decide whether to keep them separate or not, and it was a decision.
Right. So where are you physically? Where do you live?
I'm in Boston right now.
Oh, yeah. Have you been there for a while? Have you lived there a long time?
I've lived here. Oh my God. Wait, is this the podcast or we're just warming up?
Oh no, I was recording the minute you came on.
Yeah. Okay, good. Yeah. So I've moved here. I worked here as a nanny one summer in college, and then I moved here after college. So that was 99. So, oh my God, 24 years.
Wow. Okay.
Yeah.
That's not a place I get to very often, but when I do, I'm like, Boston kind of rules. Like, it's just, it's such a unique place. And, it might be a little bit challenging I'm not a big urban guy.
Okay. But are you in Colorado?
Yeah, I'm just outside of Boulder. But Boston's wonderful. Where are you from originally? Where'd you grow up?
My family is based in Philadelphia. So I went to college there. And
okay, so you've been a northeastern person.
I'm definitely a northeastern person. Yeah, I feel like I have to live on the Northeast corridor for sure.
Yeah, it's interesting how you get into that. Like, I grew up in Los Angeles, but I've been in Colorado for 26, 27 years now. But we've had, my partner and I have had conversations about maybe one day kind of getting a little place up in Vermont somewhere, or a place to hide from the world a little bit more.
Yeah. I love Vermont. And I love hiking.
Yeah.
But yeah, I think when I have traveled and I'm away from the Northeast, I feel like I'm like missing out. I'm like, I got to get back. Everything's there.
Yeah.
Like, I'm an hour behind. I'm 3 hours behind, instead of just being like, no, this is the time that it is here. I'm like, no, it's 3 hours behind the East Coast.
Totally. It's funny because there are, writers obviously live everywhere, but there does seem, through the friendships I've made, there does seem to be a hub of thriller and mystery writer activity in the Northeast. Like, you scroll on Instagram and you see, if Wendy Walker is having an event, there's 8 other writers who I know who are at the event, or they're all doing stuff with each other. I'm like, that looks kind of fun. Yeah, I don't get so much of that over here in Boulder, Colorado.
Yeah, it's interesting to think about where writers are, because it feels like the publishing industry, like the business end of things, is in New York for sure. Like, that's where the big houses are, and all the, the editors and publicists.
But even that's changing,
Even that's changing now since the pandemic. But I don't think the writers are based in New York. Although it seems like the writers are really everywhere, because you can't write from anywhere. And so it really feels like, when I interview people and I ask where they are, I get a really, really diverse, wide-ranging, international, East Coast to West Coast, Europe, Africa, like everywhere. It's really all over the world, which is pretty cool.
It is. And it makes sense when you think about it, because nobody, as a 24-year-old right out of school, says, well, I'm going to choose now to be a writer, and that's how I'm going to have my income. So let me choose a good writerly place to be. No, they have some other job, maybe always have some other job, because that's the nature of the writing industry. And so they go where the work takes them, and it's usually not dependent at all about where they would want to be were they a full-time writer? I know that was the case with me for sure. So now when you were growing up in the Philly area, I'm always curious about kind of if there's like an inflection point, right? Where you're like, when I was 13, I had this middle grade teacher who, whatever. And someone's like, I'm going to be a writer. And I think it's very rare that happens, but sometimes I'm just curious, were you exhibiting creativity as a kid? Did you have a strong love of reading? Can you trace your roots?
I can trace my roots to, I think like most writers, I was a voracious reader first. And as a kid, I was a voracious reader and was never happier than when I had a book in my hands and, could immerse myself in an imaginary, or, I also was a kid who loved nonfiction. I loved history. I loved biographies. Like I was that nerdy little kid who was, was reading biographies of historical figures. And so I loved immersing myself in both fictional and historical worlds, and felt like the learning of about other people and what their life trajectory was, or their survival was, or their triumph over difficulty was super instrumental in learning how to do this whole life thing. And so, I definitely, was first that voracious reader. And I did, as soon as I realized that those books, were written by people and they didn't just magically appear on the library bookshelves, I knew I wanted to be one of those people. But I came from a family with very little means. And so I didn't ever think that I could be one of those people who wrote these books. And so
writing is the least amount of means you could find. So it's perfect.
It is indeed.
If I want to stay poor, I'm going to become a writer.
Yeah, exactly. So I deferred that dream for a really long time. And I was the first one in my family to go to college. I worked my way through, and then still had to take a lot of loans, came out of college and was like, okay, mama needs a job that's going to pay off these student loans. And then eventually all of the real world responsibilities that all of us have, rent, car payments, mortgage, whatever it is. And so I went straight into a corporate career that was both my area of study, because I chose an area that would enable me to get a job quickly, which was communications, and then also had worked my way through college in the university's relations department, which is PR and marketing. So I went straight into that field upon graduation, and and didn't feel like I had the ability to think about, what do I want to do? It was like, what do I need to do in order to live? And that's what I did for a really long time. And then it was sort of like this moment when right around the time I turned 30 and was 10 years into my, corporate career, where I had three distinct factors sort of, come at me that made me start to think, that, okay, this is 10 years. And if I don't really start to get thoughtful about this, it's going to be another 10 years and it's going to be another 10 years. And you could really start to lose a life like that if you don't step back and ask yourself the hard questions, which are, who am I and what do I want to do with my unique talents and gifts in this one life that I have to live?
Yeah.
And when I asked myself those hard, scary questions, the answer was not continue to do corporate PR marketing.
Well, that's never the answer, right? Almost ever that's ever going to be the answer. I mean, and the fact that you asked that question of yourself when you were 30 is pretty impressive, because I think you get into that because I had a full-time corporate career until earlier this year, so for decades and decades and decades. And I learned how to do both, right? But it's so easy to be in that corporate career thinking like, this is my lot in life. I'm comfortable. I'm mildly content. I don't have time for anything else. And that's such bullshit, right? Like there's always time. It's just a matter of where your passions are directing you. But so many people, I think, are scared to even acknowledge that they have passions.
That's scary.
It is scary. And you also like, how dare I have a passion when I have to take care of my family or whatever that thing is. And that you have to be very vulnerable to allow yourself to make decisions that might might bring in less money or might be a risk for your family, but something that would fulfill you. So that's great that you had that moment. How did you make these decisions, but then you got to implement, right? So what changes did you start making to pursue something you had been thinking about?
Yeah, and I just want to clarify that moment of clarity did not come easy. When I was 22, my mother was diagnosed with terminal breast cancer and given 6 months to live. And there was no one had ever had cancer in our family before, so I just hadn't really thought about it a lot. And so she had to think about, wow, if I really only have 6 months left to live, what do I want to do with those 6 months? And it's a scary question. And so it made me think, oh my God, as I'm watching her go through this, what would I do if I only had 6 months left to live? Because the truth of the matter is none of us really know how much longer we have. I could step outside and get hit by a bus and have only 5 more minutes,
Don't do that. Not during the podcast.
I'll at least wait until after the podcast, Carter, for you, because it's all about you and your podcast.
Exactly.
No, but none of us really know, and that's an uncomfortable thought to think about. But when it was brought to me, the forefront of my life, in that, because my mother had to think about that, it made me think about that for myself. And so, I was like, oh, I don't think I would be able to I don't want to do this. But again, at the age of 22, it didn't, it was even younger and more vulnerable and less established and less mature, less able, less empowered. And so I, stayed in that career for, another 8 or 9 years, but it planted the seed of awareness. And that is always where the inception point is, the seed of awareness. And then it grows from there.
It doesn't ever go away. Yeah.
It never goes away once you hear the call. Right. But a lot of people will ignore it because it's uncomfortable and because it's scary and because you think all of those thoughts, which you just said, who am I to want more? I'm lucky to have a job. I'm lucky to have a roof over my head. I'm lucky to have food and a car and all of these things that a lot of people don't have.
Right.
So this should be enough. And should is a really tricky word that can trap you in a lot of, less than stellar stuff.
Right.
Because we feel guilty for wanting more.
Right.
And so when it takes time to sort through, the maze of these thoughts and then to take action, which is, the second part of your question. And so when I did, again, facing the hurdle of 30, which is by the age I had arbitrarily decided that, I should have things figured out. I was like, oh, I'm still in this job that I hate. And I happen to be working in a very male-dominated field, which was financial services. So I'm usually the only woman in the room. And sometimes there would be one other woman, and she was usually my boss because marketing is the one little sort of nook in financial services where women do have, or at the time, had managerial roles. And I happened to, and so I was like, an ally, an advocate, a mentor. And she was like, I hope you die. And so I happened to work under a parade of what I can only call stupendously bad female bosses. And so that really helped coalesce and create clarity too, again, through a painful inception point. So all of these things sort of started to, to create clarity around the age of 30. And then I was able to take action. The way that I was able to take action was to say, okay, let's create a savings plan, because I think it always comes down to money, right? Like we have to be able to make financial obligations. But when you start to, make a plan, it's empowering. And so I think it's a twofold question where it's how much money do I need to survive and how high is my anxiety around money? And my anxiety around money was very, very high because I came from a family that had nothing.
Right.
And so I was like, okay, this is my monthly burn rate. This is my yearly burn rate. How many months or years do I need to have saved in order to feel safe that can create the cushion that I need to then take this next step? And once I did that math and made a plan and started aggressively, really aggressively saving towards it, it already felt like, oh, I'm taking that first step, but I'm doing that. And I feel empowered because I can. Because I'm in control of my life. And that's...
You don't feel so trapped. Yeah,
exactly.
Yeah, it is so for me, my inflection point, like I just started writing when I was 33. Like one day I had an idea. It's a whole long story, but one day I just started writing out of the blue, no background in it at all.
Mhm.
And I to this day I feel like that was in lieu of me having this introspective conversation with myself, it was the universe just smacking me upside the head and saying, pay attention to this. So since that day, so I've been writing for 20 years. And since that day, yeah, I figured out how to do it with everything else in my life. And I've become a huge coach on that of like, you can do this. You don't have to give up everything. You can save, you can do a lot of different things. But it's interesting what you say, because there's all the fear of the risk, the fear of the money. And then once you kind of get past that, which is a tremendous hurdle, and I don't know if that ever kind of goes away, there's the whole other fear of like, I don't even know if I know how to write. I don't know if I'm good. I don't know, all the insecurity around imposter syndrome. And then on top of that, you might be the best writer in the world. The odds of getting published are long. The odds of making sustainable income are even longer.
Yeah.
I mean, everything's against you. So what has to exist is a deeply rooted joy and passion for the act of writing, because otherwise you'll never do. I think you would, and I'm sure you and I have both seen people kind of destroyed by that because of all the rejection, and then they just didn't have the heart to keep going, because I don't think they really had it in them to find the joy in it.
Yeah, I think that's a really good point. And I think too, I think that was the daunting odds of, if you look at the odds of, less than 1% of people who set out to finish a book actually will finish the book, and less than 1% of that 1% will actually get published, and 500,000 to 1 million books come out a year. And of those, how many actually even, make $1? And it just odds get more and more and more overwhelming. And I think that those odds and the fears around, can I do this? Will I be good at this? And even if I am able to defy those overwhelmingly daunting odds, if I do somehow manage to get published, will the book sell? Will anyone read it? Will anyone like it? Will it be, just trolled? The list of fears could keep someone frozen, or keep someone in this state of acute terror and inaction forever, for indefinite. And it's about honing in on something that feels incontrovertible, on something that feels, I must do this. And for you, it sounds like it was that joy. And for me, it was the fear of regret, because again, I'm thinking about, if I only had 6 months and how much time do I have? And so for me, it was, I don't want to die with this book still inside me. I don't want to die with this book in my heart. If I try and fail, that's okay. But what would be worse, that will hurt and that will suck and that will be terrible. But what would be worse is not trying at all and dying with this unfurled dream still in a bud-like state now within me. And so that was what was my, inciting thought or incident.
A lot of times that just like takes you to your first book, right? The fear of regret. After that, then what? So
then it was the fear of not telling the next story.
Interesting.
Now, Carter, I'm curious about you. On that day at the age of 33, why that day? Why did you sit down and start writing? Something must have compelled you.
I was in an 8-hour-long continuing education class for an appraisal license that I used to have. So you can imagine how dull that is. And I mean, it was really like you just had to sit there basically.
Yeah.
And so I decided for the last 2 hours of the class, I was going to pose myself a riddle, and I was just going to make up a riddle, and I was going to write it down. Then I was going to try to solve the riddle. That's how I was going to pass the time. Never done that in my life.
Yeah.
And I posed myself kind of a murder mystery riddle. Yeah. And I started thinking about it. And I could not come up with the answer by the time the class ended. So I went home and I started because it was almost like I'm going to figure this out. And I just started writing. I didn't tell anybody, not even my wife at the time. I was embarrassed by it. But I wrote this 400-page manuscript, and I ended up getting an agent. I didn't even know anything about agents or published it. So I just madly Googling everything. And I did get an agent with that book, the same agent I'm with 20 years later. But my first 3 books didn't sell. But I think I got to the point, I think even after writing that first book, it just kind of this innate sense of like, well, I'm just going to be doing this for the rest of my life. Whether I make money or not, I just can't imagine not writing a book every year, and I think that's been the comfort to me. And and if I make money or do anything else with it, that's icing on the cake. But I just, want to have books that I can put out there. So it's just been such, and there's ways that I have to be, I don't outline or anything. I need that joy of discovery of not knowing what's going to happen. But you do get better. You do get more thoughtful. You do become more aware of your audience over time and things like that. So those things kind of talk to you. But the act of discovery on a daily basis, I look forward to it all day long. I only write an hour a day, but I'm like, I sit down, I'm like, now what? And it's so good for your brain to have that now what. So what was the process? So you had great planning around this, which is rare for most writers. What was that process of writing that first book and seeing the challenge of actually constructing paragraphs and telling a story? Because it's really fucking hard to do that, especially when you're first starting.
Yeah, it is fucking hard. So for my first book, which took me 5 years and came out in 2013, it was not a mystery. It was a career memoir.
Right.
And I wanted to tell this story, of what we're talking about, of how to step away from what is convenient, expected, lucrative, responsible to what is true and joyful and real, because I wanted other people to have permission and not feel stuck, and to discover what you and I have both separately discovered, which is, take that leap and whatever's going to, in whatever ways are going to make it feel possible to you. And so I just sat down and started writing, and I didn't tell anyone because I was so embarrassed.
Embarrassed.
I am. Oh my God, I'm so mortified.
Like, this is assuredly terrible what I'm doing.
Yes.
Yeah.
And I think, when I finally, managed the courage to tell one friend, hey, this is what I'm doing and this is why I'm doing it. And she said, I don't think you need to write a book about that. I was so crushed, that.
What a terrible thing to say.
It was a terrible thing to say, and it really wounded. It was the first person I had told, and she said, I think it's enough that, you've just written it for yourself. You don't feel the pressure to publish it. You don't have to do that. And I think, I honestly to this day don't know if she was truly trying to be comforting or whether it was so threatening to her, who hadn't been able to leave her joyless career for what was real and true for her, what I was doing was so threatening to her world order that she couldn't bear it. I don't know.
Sounds very plausible.
Indeed it does. Detective DiVello is reporting for duty. But yeah, so I sat down and I worked, I wrote a draft. Then I worked with a critique partner, someone who was outside of my genre, who actually was writing a fantasy book. He was the complete opposite of me, a male writer writing a fantasy book. I was a female writer writing a memoir, a career memoir about leaving, the world of PR marketing and the financial service.
Still storytelling, though, ultimately.
Still storytelling, yeah. And I started teaching yoga and just to support, to be the, sort of support dependable income, a huge step down from my corporate career, but something at least.
Right.
And then I worked with him for a year, trading 30 to 50 pages every Wednesday and workshopping the crap out of it.
Wow. And
then I worked with someone within my genre to further hone it because I wanted fresh eyes, but then I wanted experienced eyes. And then, that took me 5 years of rewriting. And then I self-published that, and I chose to self-publish it because I didn't want to wait the usual several years to first try to get an agent, and secondly, to then try to get a publisher to then get in their 2-year pipeline. I didn't have time because when I started writing this book, there had never been another book like that. And in the 5 years that it took me to write it, there were several other books that weren't exactly it, but were something. And I was like, oh my God, it's only a matter of time until someone comes up with this idea as well. And I wanted to get it to market. And I also wanted to retain creative control because I knew I had a really strong vision for this book. And I also had a career in PR and marketing. I knew how to market.
About to say, exactly. That's where all that business acumen can come into play.
Yeah, totally. So then I published that, and then came out in June of 2013. And then, I started teaching, workshops related to that, to helping other people, find these, what we're talking about, these tools. Here's what's helped me. Let's see let's see what's in your heart and what you would do. And I started teaching that on the national yoga circuit, and at conferences around, both in the yoga world as well as in the corporate conference world. And then I also, a year later, started writing Broadway Butterfly. And that book ended up taking me 9 years to write and then 1 year to publish, because I had never written a mystery before.
Right.
And also because it's a true story. Yeah. And the investigation of the crime, and the crime is super, super complicated and super fascinating, but also complicated, took me a really long time to investigate.
Right. But you wouldn't have done all that research were you not in love with that idea, in love with the I'm excited to spend all this time writing this book. Yeah, no, and then what you learn from that, you parlay into your next book, and I find the whole dance very exciting and very interesting, and also the idea of if you are a career writer, your best could be yet to come at any age, and not a lot of professions.
That's true,
and that can be a truism for. But
totally, I love that.
But it is very a complicated lifestyle. So, for example, you were mentioning coaching and doing retreats. I left my corporate job last year, and now I'm launching retreats, online classes, and doing one-on-one coaching. But it's will anybody want to do this? How do I find people?
Right.
It's scary and it's challenging, but you do get to the point where I don't really want to do something around somebody else's vision anymore.
Yeah.
I want to do something around my vision. And that doesn't mean you're not having to be a team player and working with publishers and being part of a team. But the idea of this is my idea. So all my sweat is going towards my own thoughts, not to somebody else's idea of what a company should be. And that's so you haven't had that corporate gig in some time then.
Yeah, I left the corporate world in May of 2008, which ironically I timed a market. Talk about market timing. I timed that perfectly, because of course the financial services industry was about to fall off a cliff.
Yeah, so, right. That is literally the perfect time, because you would have probably, so many people were let go during that time.
Yeah, they were. And I left right before that. But I knew things were getting bad because I did PR, so I was the one who was on the front lines of
having to spend harder and harder and harder.
Yeah, and I was like, this surely is not good. I need to get out of here. So I left in 2008. I did some consulting in that field, as well as again teaching these workshops. And I just want to be really clear. I actually didn't do any coaching. I only taught these workshops, and national conferences. I taught on several other people's retreats, as far away as Indonesia.
Oh, wow.
But I never. I just want to be really clear. I didn't lead any retreats or coach or do any coaching.
Yeah. But it's exciting to do, because there's so many people out there who want to make that leap want to read it. And so I find with coaching, it's so much less about the craft, constructing the story, because I'm a firm believer in there's a million different ways to write a book. I don't believe in people this is how you write. It's bullshit. No, because if you follow somebody else's plan, again, you're not maybe finding the joy in it. But there's such an angle of psychology to it all, of what is blocking you, and really spending that time to understand why you want to write. And it surprises a lot of people where they realize I'm scared. I'm scared of success. Maybe, there's always something there that's really interesting to dig into. And I think you need those blocks removed before you can really put your heart into it.
Yeah.
That's what I've discovered, at least.
Yeah, I think that's right.
After,
Become aware of them, then you have to be willing to take ownership of them, and then you have to be willing to do the work to release them. And that's the reset process that is scary at every single step.
Absolutely. But exhilarating in a way as well. I mean, there's nothing as exhilarating as being scared. I mean, I think that's why a lot of us write mysteries and thrillers, is like we want to explore fear from a guarded position a little bit. Now, after having written your mystery, having come from a memoir, 10 years earlier, where's your mindset now in terms of writing? Like, do you want to kind of continue genre jumping? Are you firmly like, I want to tell more mysteries. I love the historical aspects of it.
Yeah, I want to stay in mysteries. I want to, and I see myself staying in mysteries. And, I've always been a mystery lover. I was a Nancy Drew girl. And then, whoever you segue to from there, Agatha Christie, P.D. James. I mean, I remember my grandmother reading us P.D. James, and that was probably not the most appropriate for children, but that's okay. And, I just have, my whole family actually really loves mysteries and thrillers. My aunts, my cousins, my grandmother loved mysteries and thrillers. And I love mysteries and thrillers. So I see myself staying here. I never want to say never, because you never know where the road is going to lead. Right. But I definitely see myself staying in mysteries and thrillers.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, and it's funny because then you get to a certain point where you're like, it's kind of hard not to want to do something else, because do I do that under my same name? Do I do it under a different name? I'm actually co-writing something for the first time in my life right now.
Oh, fun.
And it's dark thriller, but it's YA. And so I'm like, I had no idea where it's going to go.
Yeah.
It might end up just being a fun project for the two of us, but but again, it's something I'd like to do this, and I have no idea what's going to happen to it. Are you, so, I know your book came out. It's doing very well, obviously being associated with your publisher. That's very helpful to get it, in front of readers. That must have been a pretty exciting experience to be like, holy shit, I've got 2,000 reviews on Amazon.
Yeah, it's been incredible. I think anytime you put a book out and you get those first few reviews and you're like, oh my goodness, people.
Right. What's the pulse of this book?
Yeah. Tap, tap. You're out there. You're out there. And I don't even know all of you.
Right.
It's very exhilarating and thrilling. And then seeing, those reviews grow, for this book, Broadway Butterfly, my second book and first mystery, I decided to go the traditional publishing path and see how that was. I had done the self-publishing thing. I had a great experience. Now I'll try the traditional publishing thing, see how that, I went to just to see how that goes. It was a fantastic experience. And, seeing the book, go out into the world and seeing reviews and then, seeing press and media has been so exciting and so thrilling, and seeing it resonate with people and, and seeing what has resonated with people. Because I think what I've learned as both a reader, writer, and also, as a interviewer, what I have realized is that readers and writers tell stories that resonate with them for some reason, and it's always connected to their issues, their passion, what they're still thinking about or working through. And what stories attract you are the ones that are in line with that. And so what has been really interesting to me is seeing what aspects of this book resonate with people. And it is so different. And so I feel like I planted a bunch of little Easter eggs in there, and seeing who is uncovering what and what resonates with them has been so fascinating and so incredibly rewarding, because it all resonates with me. So I'm like, who's going to pick up on this little tasty thread that I have, buried here, and who's gonna discover this and resonate with this? And it has been fascinating.
Or they might, have this whole analysis of something that you didn't give two thoughts about, and you're like, I never thought about that. That wasn't my intention, but that's so cool. That's how you absorb and you're right. Books are sponges for people, and they just soak them in them. That's why I rarely describe my characters, especially my protagonists. You maybe one or two things about them, because I want the reader to be like, I see myself here, or this is how I pictured this person, and I want to ruin it by saying no, all these details about them. But it is interesting to see, even good and bad reviews. Like bad reviews might be like, well, I think to your point, it wasn't the experience that they needed, because it's rare that you get a review that's like the writing's terrible. It's usually like, the plot was slow, or, it was too unrealistic, and other people are like, I could totally see this happening. It's fast, which is why I think you ultimately have to write for yourself, because if you start thinking about all the disparate views of your books, you'll never be able to figure out the perfect plot. You have to get it done and get it out there.
Yeah, I think you do. And then you have to be prepared with the fact that it's not going to resonate with everybody, and that's okay. Just like you don't want to marry everybody, and not everybody wants to marry you, and that's okay. Or even date you, right. And that's okay. You're going to find your match in a person, in a book,
right?
In the food that you eat, the clothes that you wear, the TV shows that you watch. There's something for everyone, and that's okay.
Right.
Right. And it's interesting because I think it's really controversial, actually, that whether or not to read your own reviews. And in the 400 plus interviews that I've done, people vary wildly on the spectrum of whether they read their own reviews or not. And I do read my reviews, not every single one of them, but I will take a skim and I will read both the good and the bad, because I'm curious. I'm a deeply curious person, and I want to know, what is working for some people, what's not working for other people. I'm just interested,
right.
Fascinated. And so I do. I'm on team read your own reviews.
Yeah. I mean, I'm a little bit of a mix, but I do feel like, despite what I've said, you are producing ultimately a commodity that's going to be consumed and paid for by the public. So if I was making a backpack and put it on Amazon and people said this backpack sucks, I'd want to know why so I can go back and fix it. Now, I'm not going to go back and fix my book, but if everybody says the ending was terrible, that's something that will be in my head about like, okay, that's something to be aware of. That doesn't mean I'm going to change how I write necessarily, but you are producing a commodity. I tend to read, because I'm coming up on book 9 coming out. I'll read like right now I'm reading reviews, like the early pre-pub Goodreads reviews, just to get a sense of like, what are people thinking? And obviously you want to pay attention to you can't not pay attention to your Publisher's Weekly and your library journal and that kind of a thing. But then after it's out, I'll pretty much stop reading my reviews, because I don't necessarily get anything new from them at that point, because they tend to all follow the same bell curve after a while. Unless like somebody points out something to me, but I'll have enough sentiment to be like, okay. And I'll pay attention to how many reviews. I'm curious to see, how many people are actually, and is there a growth in that over time? But it is, I'm not the type of person whose day would be ruined by a terrible review. But it's not a fun experience.
I'm actually fine with it, because I think I was really fearful of that, especially for my first book. Oh my gosh, what if they say, I'm a talentless hack or whatever, and how will that affect me? Like, how will I feel about that?
Especially because you're self-publishing at that point, and you don't have the fallback of like, well, an editor took this on. I know it's that good. You're a little bit without a safety net, I would think.
Well, I had hired, because I am a perfectionist, and I had hired a retired senior editor at Simon & Schuster to work with me on that. And she was an incredibly successful, incredibly well-respected person in the industry. So I knew that I had at least that. I personally don't feel the safety net effect of someone, being an editor being like, your work is worthy or whatever. That doesn't feel comforting to me particularly. What I found was most comforting to me was feeling strong within myself. So when I got my first horrible review on my first book, and it actually wasn't even about the book. It was about an article that I had written about one aspect of the book, about about dating and marriage, which was this very small component of my book. But I was like, oh, this would make, sometimes you'll pull out themes and then you'll write an article about it. And this person, it was interesting because on this particular site, you had to log in through your Facebook account to comment. So I could actually see this guy's name and his profile picture. And, I could click over and it would take me to his Facebook page. And what was really, he had said something, and I can't remember, it was something like, you sound like a shallow, superficial C word who's probably, but he said it, the see you next Tuesday word. And he's probably shit at yoga, which felt like an additional.
I doubt he read the book. It doesn't sound like the book that he would pick up and read.
Right. It was interesting though. And I thought to myself, oh, well, the worst has happened. Somebody who has, who said I was shallow, superficial, talentless hack, called me, a gender specific, offensive word. And, who sort of assailed every part of the things that I thought I would feel most tender about. And I was like, oh, I actually don't care. Like, I'm totally fine.
Mm-hmm.
This guy, probably lives in mommy's basement. Like, I literally didn't care because I had.
The review is about him, not about you.
Yeah. And I know we all say that, oh, this person, people tear other people down to feel better about themselves. Want. Yeah, that probably is true and yet has felt very not comforting to me when I have been, bullied or slighted or whatever. But in this particular case about this particular aspect of my life, which was writing, I had done the work to feel strong within myself. And I had done the work to say, I believe in this and I feel good about this. And because I believe in this and I feel good about this, I literally do not care what this guy thinks.
Right.
I'm completely unaffected. And then I just kept on with my day. And it was such a turning point because I realized I actually don't have to be affected. And I'm completely not. And I wasn't just saying that to be a Pollyanna. I literally did not care what he thought.
Right.
And in that same way with Broadway Butterfly, I feel, I have done the work to make this the very best book that I can. I believe in this work. I believe in these characters. I have done the work to honor these real life people, to honor their lives, their choices, their wholeness of their humanity. And if I get a bad review, that's okay. I don't mind.
Right.
I don't mind because I'm strong within myself.
Yeah. I mean, there's a lesson in there, right? Because, you're talking about confidence ultimately, and that's a very hard thing for writers to develop, I think. I think speaking for myself, at least, living in a space of complete discomfort with myself regarding my writing for years and years and years is inevitable because you kind of don't know what you're doing. And you write a book that you think is great and then you lose perspective because you're too close to it. And it does take a long time. It took me a long time to even call myself a writer, much less have the confidence to say, this is good, and I'm not delusional saying that. I have a perspective on this that makes me feel like this is good, and if you don't happen to like it, then yeah, I get it. That's expected. It's expected. At least 40% of you are probably not going to love this book.
And I think not everyone can get to this is good. I'm not even sure that I am at this is good, but where I am truly confident is this is the best I could do at this time. I have done my best. This is it.
Right.
This book is the best I could do at this time, at this point in my life. I am sure that as a type A, overachieving perfectionist with OCD and anxiety, I will look back and think in 1 year, 5 years, 10 years and be like, oh my God, it's so embarrassing. I look back now and think, oh, I wish I had written that sentence a little differently. I wish I had chosen a different word. I could nitpick myself from here until the day I die. But what I say is this is the best that I could do at that time because that is true. And when you get to something that is true, you're unaffected by people's opinions because you're like, well, that's your opinion, but this is actually true. At this particular time, this was the best that I could do. There's nothing else to say. There's nowhere else to go. It's the period at the end of the sentence.
Totally. And you're right. Everything's a timestamp on your life. Yeah. And I love getting comments where somebody's read a lot of my books and said, I just have seen you grow so much as a writer. And I take that as like a total compliment because book 2 and book 1 were professionally published and had great editors and stuff. But still there was a lot of room for me to grow, a lot of room for me to learn. And I love like people kind of recognizing that. So it's always, it's always fun. And you don't want to be too overconfident either, because when you get that editorial letter and it's overwhelming,
no, God,
you have to, you can't have a confidence that says, well, screw this. What I already wrote is perfect. You look at that
confidence has become arrogance.
Right. And put the blinders on you, as opposed to say, everything this person is saying, everything my agent is saying is going to make my book better. And everyone is striving for that one purpose, is to sell as many books as possible. They're not trying to screw me over or backstab me. So why wouldn't I listen to this great advice? And it's very rare that I look at something my editor says and don't do it. And if I do, it's really, really minor.
Right. And 33-year-old Carter is just going to be at a different point in his life and maturity and experience and awareness and psychology and self-study and therapy and marriage and life and whatever, you have experienced than, 53-year-old Carter. These are two different people, two different iterations of oneself. And so it's like, well, of course, 53-year-old Carter is going to write differently than 33-year-old Carter and 43-year-old Carter and 42-year-old Carter and 40-year-old Carter, because you're growing and evolving as a human being. And if you're not, that's probably a bigger issue.
Yep. Totally. And it's going to be reflected in your writing, and you're going to stop publishing because, people aren't interested in somebody who doesn't grow.
Right. That's even more terrifying, I think.
Yeah. Well, listen, Sara, we've gone long because you're so fascinated to talk to you, but I'm excited to continue our conversation on your podcast. But before I let you go, we're going to do the making up part of the show, which is always a shit show. So buckle up. I've chosen 3 books somewhat at random from my bookshelves. You're going to pick one of them. We're going to choose a random sentence from a random page. I'm going to read that sentence. And then that's going to start off maybe a 2-minute long impromptu short story. So I'll read that first sentence. You give me the next sentence or two that might happen in the story. I'll do a couple sentences, and then I'll call it a day after we get to a point that sounds that we're ready to be put out of our misery. So I've got Dean Koontz's Odd Thomas, Alan Eskin's The Life We Bury. And this one just got sent to me. I'm interviewing her in a few months. Araminta, I'm not sure how to pronounce her name, Hall's One of the Good Guys, a novel. So choose one of those.
I'm going to go with Dean, because interviewing Dean was one of the greatest experiences of my life.
Oh, you talked to Dean Koontz? That's awesome.
I love him, and I'm going to go with Dean.
How did you get that set up?
His publicist asked me to interview him.
That's awesome. Good for you.
And I cried. He is an incredibly heartfelt, fully, just wholehearted person who has been through so much. And he talked about his dad's abuse, and he talked about how books saved him. And I cried. It was so moving. I love him.
That's amazing. All right. So we're going to go with Odd Thomas. So give me a page number between 1 and 400.
400.
Okay.
Wait, does that include the acknowledgments?
No, it's the last page of the book.
I feel like the word is the end.
So I'm going to, there's only a few sentences here, so I'm going to have to, I'm going to have to choose one that's going to maybe work.
Okay. I'm excited. I can pick another one.
No, this is good. This is good. I actually want to give just the first part of the sentence.
Okay.
I lead an unusual life.
There's so many possibilities here. I'm just deciding which direction to go.
Wherever you want to go.
Okay. As a yoga teacher, dog mom, home chef, and secret assassin, my days are never easy.
It's all about the scheduling, really. But there's only so many things you could put into an Outlook calendar. It's very difficult to put a 1 p.m. slot for Murder the Man Next Door. So I developed a very intricate code.
The code entails cooking implements. Knife is obvious. Spatula, not so much so. But once you've been at the wrong end of a spatula. I promise you, you'll never want to be there again.
I've been doing this so long, I've started to play a little game with myself where I've decided that I can only commit an assassination with an implement that is currently available as an emoji. Lately, I found the fry pan to be enthralling.
The candle was a mistake I'll never make again. Fortunately, there's so many other possibilities, especially in the first 1/3 of the emoji realm.
Perhaps the greatest challenge of all presented itself to me this week, in which I decided upon the whisk. And so I found myself at Bed Bath & Beyond, scanning the shelves of different whisks, trying to find one that would do the task.
Victim 778 went down the hard way by electrocution. One end of the whisk in the outlets, the other at the business end of death. Next time, I think I'll ask the victim to pick the tool that kills them, just to keep things interesting.
Oh, I think we call it there. That's fantastic. I've never had a kitchen murder mystery on this podcast before, and I'm a little bit enthralled with the idea of hey, you're in my kitchen. Why don't you look around and choose which way you want to die? That's really creepy, actually.
Well, I love to cook, Carter.
Me too.
I love to cook. And when I was deciding whether to go to do my yoga teacher training or cooking school, culinary school, it was a really tough choice. But ultimately, I decided to go to do my teacher training for yoga because I thought that the night hours of the night shift of a chef's life would make it harder to maintain a good marriage with my husband.
Yep.
So I have kept cooking as just something that's purely joyful and not professional at all, but I really love it. And I'm thinking, as we are looking at Christmas next week, I'm thinking a lot about my Feast of the Seven Fishes, which is an Italian tradition where you cook 7 different fishes, 7 different ways. And my sister and I have historically done it together. We actually have upped it to 9 fishes because, why not be better?
Right.
And then do matched wine pairings. And so I'm thinking a lot about cooking right now. And there are the cookies I'm going to bake because we do a bite-sized dessert buffet after that with, mini cheesecakes and mini cookies. And so, I love to cook. I love to eat. And so cooking is on my mind. And clearly this went to a dark and dangerous path.
Well, as you start preparing for your holiday feast, I can guarantee you're going to have some thoughts while you're in the kitchen. Be like, yeah, I could do it with this.
Yeah, totally. And I have quite a knife collection. I'm very particular about my knives. I'm sure you are as well.
Yeah.
Got to feel good in your hand. It's got to make a nice cut.
Bolt hang. Yeah.
Variability with weight, with blade, width, blade length. I have my 2 favorite knives and I never really use anything else.
Yep. Absolutely. Well, listen, so great to talk to you, and I can't wait to continue our conversation. And this was great. You're wonderful.
Well, thank you, Carter. I look forward to hosting you on April 1st. And since that will be April Fool's Day, I think I'm going to have to start thinking for the next 4 months of how I can, make April Fool's Day real, stump challenge and challenge you and delight our listeners on that day when we talk about your book.
Yeah, maybe we'll just sit and read bad reviews of each other.
Oh my God, we should. And I'm going to do yours with an accent, but the accent is going to change forever.
Wonderful.
Carter Wilson is a talentless hack. And then I'll challenge you to read one of mine, but you have to do a different accent than I did.
We can figure out something. That sounds awesome. All right, Sarah, enjoy your weekend.
Thanks, Carter. Have a great day.
Bye. So that's it. That is my conversation with the amazing and talented Sara DiVello. And I always say this, but I think that's made up story at the end had a lot of potential. I love the idea of the kitchen implements. I mean, what's not to love about that? It really gets your creative juices flowing when you think of all the different murder weapons that exist in one's kitchen. So go find out more about Sara. You just head over to her website at saradivello.com. And again, her most recent book, Broadway Butterfly, is out. I encourage you to pick that up as well. And go right ahead and pop on over at my website, carterwilson.com. You can see where I'm going to be. You can buy my books. You can check out other episodes of this podcast. You can subscribe to my newsletter. Or if you're a writer, you can find out more about Unbound Writer and about my retreats that I'm offering, the one-on-one coaching and online classes. So that is it for now. Thank you, as always, friends, for watching and or listening to this, however you get your podcasts. We're going to be sending out another one about this time next week, so check it out. In the meantime, take care.